So I'm going to talk about emoji and Chinese characters, which are sort of one of the most modern visual forms of written communication versus one of the kind of oldest existing forms. My name is Jenny Lee. Hello. And I am Chinese American. And one of the things that I've been fascinated by is sort of the parallels between emoji and then Chinese characters, which I learned growing up. So Chinese and English, I sort of learned simultaneously. Chinese, I probably learned to speak first. And so you have everything from fire to mouth to trees or wood to the moon to the sun. And what's really kind of interesting about Chinese characters is that you can mix and match them conceptually. And there are all kinds of fun ways that you can see this happen in all the kind of meanings that develop from that. For example, if you have two trees together, you get a forest. If you have a sun and a moon together, that character Ming means bright. This is a really fun one. So this is basically a pig underneath a roof. And so you would think like, oh, that may mean farm, or that mean, basically can be some kind of agricultural thing, but actually that character means home. So in the Chinese concept of what a home is, it is where your pigs are underneath a roof, or family actually. So both mean jia means both home and it means family. So I think that says a lot about like how the Chinese used to think about, what it meant to be, at home. And even now in Chinese, there's obviously this huge Chinese diaspora. They've trying to sort of sent more immigrants out into the world than anywhere else. And even within China, there's a lot of internal migration. And so there's this idea where someone will ask you like, where are you from? But the way they ask you is ni lao jia zai nar, which means like, where is your old family home? And so it doesn't mean like where you were born. It really means like if you rewind your kind of genetics, where in China do you come from? So one of the most kind of used radicals in Chinese is this idea of woman. So if you kind of look, it looks like a woman maybe in a dress curtsying. And this radical is used like all over the place. This is one of my favorites also. This is a woman underneath a roof. And so you're like, oh, that might mean wife, or it might mean mother, or it might mean, family. But no, that character an means peace. So things are at peace when the woman is at home, which I thought, growing up as a little Asian girl in New York City, I always thought was sort of a very interesting subliminal messaging thing in terms of Chinese characters. And what is kind of really also interesting is this idea of you take nu and you put it with zi, which is a child or male child. Again, in combination, you're like, oh, that might mean like family or mother or child or whatever, but no, it actually means good. So the standard for goodness in Chinese culture, like from the very beginning, this is like one of the first characters you learn when you're a little kid, is a woman who has a male child. It's like disturbing for all kinds of reasons when you're like a little girl. So the female radical is used in all kinds of weird, creepy ways. For example, 3 female radicals together means evil. So this idea of like if you get 3 women together, they're always up to no good, which is obviously present in Shakespeare and a lot of literature. This character means greedy. So it's like wood and female. This character means slave. This character means jealous. And this character means basically a betrayal or adultery. So it's not used in the most like flattering way. So a couple years ago, me and a couple of friends decided to do a inventory looking at all 214 official Kangxi Chinese radicals as defined by the dictionaries. Now, to be clear, not all of these were when the writing was evolving, it wasn't clear that these things were going to be radical. This is sort of a dictionary system that went backwards and tried to figure out which things deserve to be radical. So there are about 214 of them. And they vary from, the very, very simple to actually fairly, very complex. Like these basically have almost no meaning. They're just sort of like strokes in a way. And these are like very complex. These are also considered quote radicals. Like one of them means turtle, one of them means dragon, one of them means teeth, one of them means tripod, I guess you would call it. One of them means nose, one of them means flute. So even though they look like they're very, very complex, they're still considered radicals within sort of the Chinese dictionary system. So you can see like both like the old interpretation of a character and a new interpretation of a character. This means door, men means door or gate. And you can see how it's like two doors or two swinging things. And then obviously in our modern interpretation, we tend to have just one door. So we went through and tried to basically match emoji with the kanji radicals, and we kind of basically came up with three main categorizations. So one is like there is literally direct equivalent where like sun, there is a character for sun, or there's a character for water, or there's a character for mountain. Literally, it's a one-to-one thing. Then there's something which what we would call like an indirect equivalent. So this idea that it doesn't literally mean, but sort of the association is there. So one example of that is this idea of li, which means strength. And we have this emoji, which is a sort of curled bicep, which technically doesn't mean strength. It literally is an arm, but just in terms of visual representation, we take it to mean strength. And the last one is sort of interesting. It's what we would call associative, where there's a quality that is very much matched to the thing, but it is both neither literal or it's not sort of like an indirect equivalent. So one example, there is a radical for sweet, and we're like, well, honey means sweet. In many kind of cultures, this idea of honey is something that we would consider sweet. So what's kind of really interesting is sort of the whole range of characters in or radicals in Chinese that have emoji equivalent. And the reason why I find that very powerful is that if something was sort of important to people 5,000-6,000 years ago, and it is important enough to us now, to see the parallel in the human kind of what humans care about over 5,000 years shows a certain kind of consistency. So this is gua, which means melon. Ya means tooth. This one's fun. This is turtle. It looks like a turtle, I think, kind of on its side. And of course, we have a turtle emoji. And meat, ro, and that we also have a meat emoji. I actually proposed this emoji way back, I think like 2016, I think I wrote the proposal for that. So as I mentioned, the indirect equivalents, we have things like li, which is sort of strong. This one is sort of mystical or like divination. So we had one that was basically the globe. And then with the sort of associative ones, there was some like sweet, as I mentioned, scholar. We have this sort of graduation cap, work. Like this one was a little bit tricky, but I kind of figured in our, with the like seven dwarves, hi ho, this idea of like a pickaxe is equivalent to work. And so we kind of spent a whole bunch of time creating this chart of which emoji had, kind of could be matched up with which Chinese radicals. And it's kind of super fun to see kind of obscure concepts have both emoji and radicals. For example, this is the radical that means snout. Like I don't actually think a pig snout is significant enough, but both in emojidom and in Chinese character, we've decided that a pig snout is deserving of visual representation. This idea of like stepping or walking, we have these little footprints, and it's this idea, this radical on the left is actually a very commonly used radical. It's everything from like to literally walk, to run, like to take a step. So like another one I thought was really interesting is there is a radical that means two hands together, and you're like, huh, how strange, like why would they have that? But if you look at emoji, we have like three of them, three characters that basically mean two hands together. And then there is, things like, bow and arrow, again, we got creative, like, oh, this sort of repeat, recycle. This is part deep in the emoji keyboard with all of the sound, like record, play, pause kind of symbols. And there's bone. I actually helped write the proposal for bone way back when, and box, lots of boxes. Quite complex is actually dragon. We actually have 2 emoji for dragon, very important to Chinese, very important to, I guess, Western culture. There are 2 forms of dragons in emoji, them like full body and the head. And there is like this idea of compare, B, pretty important in Chinese. And we actually even have sort of scales, which is nice. And axe. This was one, I think I also worked on this proposal as well. There are actually some fun things where like look like they should be emoji, but are not. This actually is not what it looks like, but I really like the fact it kind of looks like this character. They do not mean the same thing, but it's irresistible to put them side by side. So as I mentioned, some concepts are pretty direct and straightforward. Others are kind of more conceptual. Like there is a character, it means like over or crown or 3-sided enclosure from the top, cloth cover. I mean, like you read the dictionary definition. So what we found of the 214 radicals to emoji, about 90 had direct equivalents. These are the Chinese radicals. 90 of the Chinese radicals had direct equivalents. 75 had indirect equivalents if they didn't already have a direct equivalent. And then 22 had an associative property, and then 28 were kind of left out in the cold. So of our total inventory, about 87.3 had reasonable equivalents, whereas 13.1 had nothing, like basically like didn't have a direct, indirect, or associative. And you'll notice that they don't add up to 100 because of those very simple ones in the beginning that were just like strokes or dots. I kind of consider that they didn't really have inherent meaning, so they kind of just aren't used as they kind of fall into neither category. But what we discovered is like there are actually some like very interesting pockets of gaps. So one area is adjectives. So while there are a lot of radicals with that are adjectives in Chinese, like big, small, long, or tall, it's really hard to kind of convey that directly through emoji. And the way that we often do it is like using animals. So like big might be elephant, tall might be giraffe. And then there's this idea in Chinese characters of where did I go? Of selfness, or like oneself, or privacy. Very important in Chinese. There's 3 different versions of it in the radicals, but there's not really good way to say I or me or anything in emojiness, which is kind of interesting. We just came up with a way to say you, which is basically a finger pointing at someone in emoji, which is actually quite impressive as an emoji character. And then another sort of huge category of missing things were like textures. So skin, hair, leather, fur, bristle, all kind of conceptually important, but really hard to draw from an emoji perspective. And then another one, and I feel less sad about this, but it's this idea of like antiquated concepts, like jade, very important back then, or like spear axe, like kind of important like Game of Thrones era, but probably not so important modernly, so we don't really use them as much. And then there's mortar and tripod. So these are all items that are really important in ancient China, less so important in 21st century worldness. And so what's cool is potential future emoji. So branch, sphere, cave, and table. These are ones that we kind of discovered kind of felt like could be emoji, but weren't. And so actually in like somewhere between 2019 and now, I actually did propose cave and I did propose table. Those were both rejected for whatever people decided they weren't exciting enough as emoji. And again, the people who kind of regulate emoji are the Unicode emoji subcommittee, of which I, through my indignation of not having a dumpling emoji, kind of fought my way onto the table with like Google and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft. So what's also been interesting is since we last did our original work, there have been a couple emoji that we use the Chinese characters as a kind of guidance to push for. So one was bean, which arrived in 2021. Flute is coming to your phones within the next couple of weeks if it hasn't arrived already. And then this idea of branch, we have one that's sort of desiccated tree, which may be coming in 2024. It was one of the very few emoji that we passed this year. So for more information, we actually have a children's book that came out about this topic. It's from MIT Press. Came out about a month ago. So it's for kids-ish. So it's MIT Press. And the book is called Hanmoji. And we have a bunch of, there's sort of an academic kind of basis for it, but it's really a book that's really well illustrated for kids. And this is me and my co-authors. So that's An Xiaomina on the left and Jason Lee, who is a designer on the right. We all speak Chinese and write Chinese for different reasons. Jason is born and raised in Hong Kong, but went to Canada when he was very young. And then An Xiaomina is Filipina, but she learned in college and actually speaks Chinese pretty well. She worked for Ai Weiwei as an artist way back when. And then I grew up in New York City, born and raised, but went to Chinese school. So we all kind of have a double fluency in both design and memes and visual communication while at the same time learning Chinese. Ta-da! So that is me. And I will give back. Ta-da! I think. Oh, your questions. All right.
Thank you, Jenny. That was amazing. I have one question, actually. Zhu Bing.
Yes.
I started to read his book, and I thought it was impossible, but actually, I'm just about managing. How do you feel about this? Because you could presumably do your children's book all in emoji.
How do I feel about just the whole phenomenon of Chinese characters? So I think there's the more that I play in emoji land, emoji, not a language. A lot of people call it a language, not a language by strict linguistic definitions. If we can't call it a language, we should actually come up with another word to describe communication medium-ish thing, because it clearly has tapped into another vein. And if we don't have a word for it, we want to use the word language. And I'm still waiting for whatever academic is going to come up with that term. So there are a couple of things that I find really fascinating about this. So one is when you're Chinese, you learn to mix and match little radicals, and we also do that in Emojiness. You guys just might not see it because it's sort of seamless. So for example, a rainbow flag is a rainbow and a flag glued together by your operating system. So if you send it to someone with an old operating system, it'll go boop, and it'll pop into two different characters. Another one is doctor is a man or a woman or a gender neutral person with not a stethoscope, because a stethoscope actually did not exist at the time we were coming up with all these occupations, but it is a medical symbol. So there's a whole bunch of examples that are kind of very quiet of compound emoji. One of my favorite ones was actually polar bear is a bear plus snow. And originally it was bear plus white. And then people thought about it and they're like, actually, no, we should make it bear snow. That being said, the Unicode subcommittee is very, very resistant to the sort of kind of compound emoji, but I think it's almost inevitable. I actually think emoji were less kind of invented and more a discovery, and they're kind of our most native digital way of communication, right? Because most written communication that we transmit digitally is a digital equivalent of an analog system of writing that comes mostly from spoken. So we spoke first, then we wrote it down, and then in an analog form, and then we made it digital. Emoji are almost purely digital, right? You could not have that system of quote unquote writing without the ability to touch with your finger, right? Because we had wingdings for a really long time, but they didn't have the explosive power because it was really hard actually to sort of call them up on your laptop. But there's something about our mobile devices and our touch that sort of unleashed the whole dimension of communication that I think was harder, that was latent in our human bodies, but did not explode with until like our phones came, and then Unicode standardized these little pictures, and then suddenly like in 2001 it's like a straight like shot up in terms of explosive emoji growth. And what's kind of interesting is there's the face with tears of joy by itself is 10% of all emoji usage. Like that shocks me because I do not use that emoji that much, but people must love that emoji. And then red heart is number 2 at like 6.6%. Ta-da. So I can talk all day about emoji. I've devoted, it's like this extracurricular run amok in my life. I started in 2015, very indignant there was no dumpling emoji, because to me, dumplings are a universal food, no matter what culture. Pierogi and ravioli and empanadas and gyoza and khinkali. And so for me, dumplings are universal. Emoji were this universal, kind of form of communication. So the fact there was no dumpling emoji meant whatever system in place had completely failed. I had no idea where emoji came from, but I went on this adventure, and it is now 7 years later. 7 years later, almost probably to the week.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.